All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Artful Leaders interview series. I'm super excited to have our guest today, Dr. Patty Ramirez, and I'll talk a little bit more about her in a minute. My name is Rochelle Archer, and I'm with Artful Leadership Coaching and Consulting. And my work is really about helping educators impact young lives sustainably by putting their own well-being first so that they can really lead with a full tank, and also to support them with creating a culture of care that will really carry staff and students through all kinds of changing times. And this series has been an opportunity to kind of pick the brains of folks who are leading at the intersection of education, arts, healing, social justice, social change, and really figure out together, how do we move forward through this really extraordinary time that we're in, and who are the leaders that we can look to who can give us that creative inspiration and give us some practices that can really center healing in our work. And so that is why I invited Dr. Patty Ramirez to join me today, because her work is all about healing justice and healing centered leadership and social justice and social change. And so I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you so much. And why don't you just hop on and tell us a little bit about you and your work and how you got here.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to just be part of this conversation. I'm so excited to connect with you and to connect with everyone else that's listening. So I recently became Dr. Patty Ramirez after I don't know how many years of school and work. I earned my doctorate of social work from USC. So I'm very happy and proud to celebrate that accomplishment. But I was born and raised in East Los Angeles, so I am an Angelino here in Los Angeles, California. I used to live in San Diego a couple of years ago, where I did a lot of work with immigrant victims of crime and asylum-seeking families. I worked in the immigration legal services sector and supported a lot of nonprofit organizations that were providing legal services that, for the most part, did not have social workers as a support. And so I was one of the few social workers in my field talking about trauma-informed care and really trying to figure out how do we equip legal service providers to not only provide trauma-informed care services, but also to take care of themselves, because a lot of that work consisted of stories that were, very sad, very, traumatic for those that were listening and those that were telling the stories. But, I like to say I was born fighting for my life, and I haven't stopped since. And this is because I was, a preemie baby born at 6.5 months. And, maybe 20 years later, I would kind of have a awakening with preconception health work and reproductive justice that really helped me make sense of why maybe I was born very early and how that has impacted me in my later life. But being from East LA and going to a school that was very Latino, social justice driven, my school was one of the schools that was part of the East LA walkouts in the 60s, part of the Chicano movement. And so as a student, I was very involved. And then in college, I continued to, be part of violence prevention work. And it led me to where I am now. So I'm excited to share a little bit more about that through our conversation.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit. When I was kind of like familiarizing myself with your work, you're doing some stuff with Trauma Informed LA, and you also have like your own institute. And I would love to hear a little bit about what you're doing now, especially during this, really, I don't know, like I said earlier, very extraordinary time.
Yeah, so I was working with Trauma Informed LA this past year, and I transitioned out to fully dedicate myself to my institute. So I founded the Healing Justice Transformative Leadership Institute, which is actually going to be rebranded to Colibri Institute. And it's a beautiful story of why that will be. But the Institute really became my way of reimagining how we heal and lead. And so the way that or something that I noticed from my upbringing, from my work, from my education, was that many of us who are directly impacted are, somehow we become very committed to the movements, the social justice movements. And we are working in organizations that are not equipped to support the healing and resilience of their staff.
Yeah.
We see how organizational culture is rooted in white supremacy. Yep. And so what happened to me and what I noticed happened around me was that I was burning out, and I did burn out. I burned out with a few jobs, school, everything just piling up, and I was unable to show up for myself and those around me. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, there has to be a better way.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where the Institute comes in, where it is a place to reimagine what it looks like to lead in an organizational context while centering healing and resilience. Right. And so organizational culture then becomes a culture of care, as opposed to, a culture rooted in white supremacy and capitalism. It's a lot of unlearning. And so my hope is that, with the Institute, I can launch Leading with Heart, which is going to be a healing leadership methodology where leaders who want to integrate healing in every aspect of their work could then be part of a Leading with Heart cohort and go through the different anchors of what I call healing from ethno-racial trauma, which is actually part of a radical healing framework by some amazing psychologists in Chicago. So I really pay homage to their work.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that is so exciting. And I want to know all about that because that's just so aligned with the work that I'm really passionate about doing. I've spent, 25 years working predominantly with youth impacted by homelessness, or very poor youth here in San Diego, many of whom are, coming from so much history of oppression, border issues, immigration issues, and all these different things. And working with these devoted folks who want to support them. But the focus is so on youth, and it's so on the families, that the folks who are doing that work they do burn out and they get fried. And so I think that it is so important for us to do everything you're talking about, of slowing down and shifting out of that sort of white supremacist capitalist way of looking at things, and really prioritizing relationships and prioritizing our humanity and our sustainability, because we want to be able to do this for the long haul. And the last thing we want to do is have our leaders fried and unable to do the work that they're so passionate about. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about your framework. You talked about leading with heart, and I know that has a specific meaning to you in the framework that you're presenting. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so leading with heart, like I mentioned, borrows from a psychology of radical healing. And they actually, they frame heart as healing from ethno and racial trauma. And so there's a couple of different components that, and I wanna make sure that I uplift their work, but it's Helen Neville, Hector Adames, Nayeli Chavez Duenas, Danielle Dawson, and other colleagues created this framework, which is rooted in 5 anchors. And the anchors include collectivism, it includes acknowledging cultural strengths and resistance, cultural authenticity, radical hope. And it really requires that they build on their cultural strengths and resistance. And so with this framework, the premise or the intent is that with these 5 anchors, we're able to promote and support the healing and liberation of Black, Indigenous, people of color, and communities. And so the way that I adapted, because this is a psychological framework,
yeah,
it's created for therapists and psychologists working specifically with Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the mental health setting. And so I adapted in what I call it like a macro setting. So what does it look like in a leadership development context? And so I created 4 different anchors of, leading with heart, which includes embodied safety. And so it really calls us to ask, what does it look like to come back home to ourselves, right? Because I know for myself, I experienced so many experiences in my personal and work life that took me away from my body, and created this like disembodiment. And so, and especially those who have caused or endured harm, you will see that show up in many different ways. And so, embodied safety was really critical because it allows us to redefine what does safety look like for us? And then what does collective safety look like? Because in the collective setting, we are all responsible for making, the workspace safe, for making our collective safe, right? And then in addition to that, it's compassionate accountability. And so really looking at how do we lead from a place of compassionate accountability for the self and for others, right? And so it borrows a lot from transformative justice frameworks, restorative justice, where, the question is more so, what are the underlying needs? Right? And instead of personalizing the issues, it's really about looking at what the problem is and identifying what are the needs and how can they receive care. Right? So it feels a little bit radical whenever I talk about this with others, and especially currently I am collaborating with Roots, which is reclaiming our own transcendence. And so I am a co-facilitator for a 9-week curriculum called Healing Cycles of Harm. And so this curriculum really also is very much grounded on some of the anchors that I talk about when it comes to leading with heart. I'll have to share that with you in case anyone is interested.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to share links or anything like that, because I know I'm working with a number of leaders right now. I do a lot of work with folks in expanded learning and like after school creative youth development. And there are a lot of artists and activists in that work who are so passionate about the youth that they want to serve, and all these anchors and these tools that you're talking about are just so important for them. And especially for those who, like you, come from a background where you've been fighting since you were born, and and it's so important to prioritize the well-being and the healing of those folks so that they can, all of you can continue to be a part of this and make the changes that you envision. So, and I just feel privileged to kind of be a part of it and open, doorways and connect folks as much as I can as an ally in this work. So, so tell me a little bit about like, when is this institute going to kick off for you, or when are these cohorts going to begin?
Yes. I mean, if it was up to me, it would be like today. But right now I'm in the startup phase, if you will. So I am in a space where I'm building capacity to develop the curriculum itself. So I'm currently, I have like a conceptual framework for it.
Yeah.
But the next step is to actually create a community of practice to help co-create this curriculum, because I do think that it has to be grounded in the communities that it's intended for. And like I always like to quote a mentor of mine. Her name is Dr. D, and she always says, you cannot take your community anywhere you haven't been. And so for me, making sure that all of the components are things that I have experienced, or that the community of practice that I invite to help co-create, that they have experience, so that we make sure that it is an authentic experience for those that then later join and access this Leading with Heart curriculum. So my hope, if I'm being very honest, I hope that I can launch it by next year. Right now, I'm building the capacity. I'm inviting people to co-create with me. And so the hope is that I get to pilot a module or a few by next year. Mm-hmm. I'm excited, so stay tuned.
I will. That is very, very exciting. And I think that it's very courageous to step out on your own and really take the time that it takes to build this thing that you are so passionate to offer the world, and to co-create with your community. So many of the folks that watch this are educators or folks working in healing settings with a lot of BIPOC youth and families, and leading organizations, and that are serving communities, especially here in San Diego. And I was just curious, what for these teaching artists or arts therapists or program directors or whatever, what would be your recommendations for them to really begin to lead from a healing centered way, as we begin this new school year? What would you prioritize?
I mean, I would prioritize themselves. Like, I think that the first step is to go inward. Mm-hmm. It's really to kind of like you mentioned earlier, to, as uncomfortable as it may be, to slow down. To slow down and really assess, like, what are the areas of my life that need care? And the other thing is, I truly believe that we all have the medicine that we need to heal ourselves, right? I believe that in my soul, in my core, we have our inner wisdom, our intuition. Those are things that know exactly what we need, right? And so part of the turning inward is acknowledging that I have a lot of strengths. I have a lot of things that I can give to myself. What is the first thing that I can give to myself right now in this moment? Mm-hmm. Right? So delaying care is no longer the pattern, right? When we slow down, when we care for ourselves as we need it to, instead of delaying care and then leading to burnout, we are able to actually be in practice with the practice of healing.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that looks as simple as drinking water, as taking a walk, as engaging with nature, as journaling, as exploring your ancestral cultural healing practices. I think it begins with us. And then, as you model it for yourself, everyone else is watching. One of the things that I've noticed from my journey has been that my sister and my mom have been watching me this whole time. And it is so beautiful now to see them both prioritize themselves, name their boundaries, honor each other's no's. And I mean, that's beautiful for me to witness. And I get to continue to do that. And even in my supervisory relationships with, I have MSW interns that I supervise, I do the same. I empower them and validate their boundaries, their no's, right? Because that's the only way that we can transform. And it can be very uncomfortable, but integration, it takes practice. So being in practice with the practice would be a priority as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love what you said, because like I teach a very similar model of like starting with yourself, starting with your checking in with your own body, your emotions, your thoughts, and your mindset, and then figuring out what you need to do to kind of complete the stress cycle that you might be in. Right. And there's all, connect, express yourself creatively, move your body, breathe, all those things. And then it's really about also connecting to, what's my purpose and what's my passion, and how do I say yes to things and say no to things to really take good care of my passion and my purpose. And that's so about boundaries, right? It's so about, and I think especially when we're so passionate about helping others, we can really get caught in this cycle of thinking that as long as we're in the business of helping others, like we're doing the right thing. And sometimes we can get way off track with that, right? If we're trying to like respond to every need that shows up, pretty soon we could get real far off track, and we can really lose ourselves and our purpose in the process. So I think with honoring those boundaries, understanding what it's going to take for us to fill our own cup and for us to, stay on purpose is so important. Yeah. So in terms of like leaders, and how they, lead meetings or lead their organization or even lead groups of young people or whatever, what are we talked about some practices that are kind of more personal. What are the things that you would recommend people do when they're coming together to plan this year or to start the new school year in this healing centered approach?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you what it would look like without this, which is we have a meeting, we have an agenda, and we get to work.
Yeah.
Right? A healing centered approach would be putting a pause on the agenda and really making space and time to connect, with everyone. And everyone would have a role in co-creating a space. So sometimes that may look like creating a collective altar, if that's part of, the community's practice. Or it may look like we're just gonna cook together and connect in a very authentic way before we start talking about business. That would be, that is my first approach. I always, make space for just connecting as humans and letting our humanity kind of take center fold, if you will, like that is the main purpose. And then, the next thing, so within my own leadership style and the way that I work with my interns, for example, I will always prompt us to co-create an agenda, because people are more likely to buy into something they co-create.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's what is important to you today? What should we talk about that you need? And sometimes guiding it, like there is, for example, within the context of my institute, a big thing is, okay, we do need to plan strategically.
Yeah.
Right. And so what does that look like in a healing centered way? And so a lot of it is what feels alive for you today? Like, what direction can we go that you are excited to work towards? And allowing everyone to have voice and choice is, that is one of the ways that you build trust and rapport within your team, so that then they can be more, they can feel safe to be in their bodies in the space that we have co-created.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you could say a little bit more about what have you observed is different about sort of like the results you create as a community when you take that pause to connect and center your humanity and center what's alive for the folks in the room. What happens as a result of that in the team, in the organization, and in the impact that you get to have?
Yeah, it's not immediate in the sense that we go from, oh, we are having a more heart-centered conversation, because I have to be very honest. Resistance happens first.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
This is not what we're used to. This is not how we do business. So best believe that tension and resistance will happen first. And so one of the things that I do is normalize that that is normal.
Yeah.
That's so valid. I'm like, some of you, this may feel weird for some of us, right? Like
Yeah.
those are the kinds of conversations that we'll have throughout the process. Because for me, I always say process is just as important as outcome
Yeah.
in context, right? And so really paying attention and normalizing resistance and how it shows up is part of, you know, a leadership strategy that I definitely think is helpful in facilitating the reframing. Because what it is, it's a reframing. We are integrating new practices that offer a reframing into how we do the work that we do, how we show up. And sometimes, you know, honoring our humanity may be asking the question, what are some barriers that are keeping you from participating in this conversation? And when we name them, we can then say, well, how can you offer a care so that you can show up?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that becomes our normal culture of relating. And one of the things I've noticed, you know, kind of in the long term, is that people are more likely to acknowledge all aspects of themselves everywhere they go, as opposed to compartmentalizing.
Yeah.
Which I think, you know, tends to keep us in a very disembodied space. So if I leave everything at the door, I'm not showing up fully here.
Right. And wellness is so about integrating, right? And so that's so important. And I think in our dominant culture, we're taught to compartmentalize, right? We're taught to leave our personal life at the door, or to show up in this sort of mask of professionality or whatever. And that causes so much harm, and it really creates so much unwellness. And so even though these process, in my experience also, I find, you know, it takes a little bit longer at the onset, but as we go along, the work that we're able to do is so much more authentic and rich, and emerges from the core of the community and our common vision. So yeah, I love how you articulated all of that process. Yeah. So a couple of questions that I ask almost everybody who I speak with on the interview series. There's a couple of things. One of them is like, for you, for your own self-care practice, what is your first go-to when it's time for you to like, take care of you? Like, what do you jump for?
My self-care, that my go-to is roses. I actually will use, so I am in a journey of reclaiming and remembering my ancestral medicine. And so I actually facilitated a rose limpia, a cleanse that I do with roses, because roses are like, it's my favorite flower. I'm very, like, roses help me feel joy. I will usually, depending on the color of the rose, I will set different intentions. And so that is my go-to. Like, I will buy myself flowers. I will use some for a cleanse, others for a bath, others for a tea. And it just becomes a beautiful way that I create medicine with roses and give warmth back to myself, essentially. I also, I would say the second thing, so I have a micro enterprise called Wild Luna Botanicals. And so I create affirmation candles. And so Wild Luna is a self-care and wellness lifestyle brand. And so my affirmation candles are my second and first go-to, right? I truly believe in the power of positive affirmations, not necessarily to negate our experience, but more so to offer reframing, right? And connect with our medicine, with our inner wisdom. And so making candles, using them has been such a powerful part of my practice, because I truly believe in intentions and in manifesting using candle magic and other types of brujita tools, as I like to call them.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and I think all that multi-sensory stuff is it's so enlivening, and it really has such a kind of a magical feeling, right? And there's something about colors and textures and scents and warmth and cool and all those things that you're describing that are just they're so good for enhancing wellness and shifting the state that we might be in, right? And kind of coming into the present moment. So helpful. I love that. And with all of the things that you're sharing, I'll make sure that we kind of share some ways to get a hold of you and to purchase your products from your wellness line. I think it'd be great for people to connect with you. The other question that I ask a lot of folks is, what is something that you wish all educators knew?
I think, I think it's, and I have a lot of friends, that are educators as well. So I'm thinking a lot about what would I love to say to my friends. I think, it can be really easy to get stuck in the standards, in the curriculums, in the demands of our education system. But I want to acknowledge that we, and I'm thinking of myself as a student now, as a student, when I had, specific teachers that changed my life, for me, they probably don't know what an impact they did. And so I would just remind all my educator friends and educators out there, then don't underestimate the power of the seeds that you're planting. Because if the stress of the bureaucracy of our education systems and the schools that you're in, are just things that are taking over your day, I hope that for one moment you can just think about the power of the seeds that you're planting. You get to be part of what cultivates those seeds as you continue working with your students. And then those seeds come to fruition. And then they become me and other people who are doing work, who were just so impacted by the teachers in their lives that did believe in them, when maybe, at home or in our communities, we didn't have access to the same type of mentorship and care and compassion.
Yeah.
So I hope that message is heard, and that for whomever it resonates, that you take it with you, because it was meant for you. And if it doesn't, just leave it.
Yeah. Well, what I love about your message is that I think, when we're in a classroom environment and we're so worried about getting all the things done and getting the curriculum right and all those things. And I know for me, and I'm guessing for you too, it was about the adult who saw you, the adult who connected with you. It wasn't about whether they taught the class perfectly or how they delivered blah, 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 right? It was really about the heart that they showed you, or how they demonstrated that they cared, And so it's like, when you're worried and overwhelmed by all those things, it's really those transformative relationships with young people that make the biggest difference. So and it may not show up in the test scores right now, but when you look at that person's life over time, that's where you really get to see those really important outcomes of those seeds that you planted. So thank you for that. That was really beautiful, almost like a blessing, like really, really, really beautifully said. So is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience about how they can find you, or what, where you would like to steer them next to connect with you? Yeah, just give you an open forum to say anything else you'd like to share.
Yeah, so I'll definitely share any links to help you all access the Healing Cycles of Harm curriculum. We do have an upcoming summer cohort, which starts next Monday, and so we're still accepting applications. So if you're interested, you can go to wetakeroot.com, and you can find the Healing Cycles of Harm curriculum under services. But aside from that, I would love to connect with all of you. So if you are interested in reaching out, you can find me at www.drpattyramirez.com. Super easy and straightforward. But my contact info is there, and I'm happy to connect on social media as well. I'm just really excited for this conversation. And I think if I could say anything at all and kind of like end it in this way, is that for everyone, right, not just educators, but for all leaders, you don't have to do any of this alone. I think the power of collective care and community care is so critical now, especially. And so I firmly believe in the communities of practice that I mentioned. And that would be the focus of Leading with Heart, right? To create a community of practice where we are all as a collective in practice with the practices. And we are integrating and we're learning and we're co-creating. And so I invite you all to do the same, to start reaching out to those people who can be part of your community of practice, and start having those conversations. And I'm interested in what surfaces when with the power of collective and community care.
Yeah, so beautifully said. And that's really been my intention with this series, is to reach out to folks that I feel like are part of my like bigger web of community care, and folks who are aligned with me, and that I get to be a part of a movement that really shifts the way that we do business, and that we aren't alone, and that we can really make changes as we do this work together. So thank you so much. I wish I could give you a hug. I wish I could. I would love to meet you in person at some point when, all these restrictions go away, and I'd love to hear more about your institute as that develops. It's been such a joy to talk with you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your healing words with us today. I hope we can stay in touch, and I'll talk to you again soon. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching.